Hi everyone, I'm Jack Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on Patrimony, A True Story by Philip Roth. This is an excellent book. I think it's one of Roth's 5 best books, frankly. And I'd encourage folks to read it, even if you're maybe not a fan of Roth, and I'll get into why. But I read it this past weekend and was just entranced by it. It was just a compulsive reading experience. And it was ironic to read it last weekend because it was Father's Day. And this is a book that deals with the final 18 months of Herman Roth's life. It is a book in which Roth details his father's final year and a half, the illness that finally ends his life, and how Roth is trying to deal with that. It is an emotionally grueling book. I lost my own father over 20 years ago at this point, and so reading this brought up those emotions for me, and I think it will for many readers. But it is a very incredible and moving tribute. It's a tribute to Herman Roth, but also to Roth's mother, Bess. It's a tribute to Lil, the woman who had become Herman Roth's companion after his longtime wife had passed away, and who helped care for him in the final years of his life. And they found joy together, moments of joy before this illness came. And it is a book that is a tribute, not just to them, but to an entire generation of individuals who, as first or second generation immigrants to the U.S., had carved out a sense of purpose, a sense of community and identity as things were changing, and the love they had for their children, a love that Roth is willing to accept very firmly in this book, in a way that sometimes he wasn't always particularly interested in. It is a book that I think if you're a fan of Philip Roth's writing, this is a crucial work. It is in some ways a skeleton key to a number of his works, including lesser works like Our Gang. And I'll talk about that in a later section of the video. But even if you're not a fan of Roth, or if you've never approached him, this is a great insight into a generation, into a writer who, even if he was, pick the term, misogynistic, narcissistic, priapic, all of those are true among various works of his. This is a book in which he is at his humblest and at his perhaps most honest, not particularly interested in putting on a mask. And so I want to read a couple of passages, give a sense of what this book sounds like, and talk about, just why I think it's such a fantastic book to read. So he opens very honestly. My father had lost most of the sight in his right eye by the time he'd reached 86, but otherwise he seemed in phenomenal health for a man his age. When he came down with what the Florida doctor diagnosed incorrectly as Bell's palsy, a viral infection that causes paralysis, usually temporary, to one side of the face. And so this book was published, I believe, 2 years after Herman Roth had passed away. And so readers were approaching it knowing that Roth's father had died, but they don't know all the details. And so here we just have it, he's 86 years old. Roth will later note that he's in his mid-50s at this point, and that this diagnosis of Bell's palsy is incorrect. But we as readers follow along in learning what is actually happening. What are the actual details? What is it like to have someone in your life who is in their 80s and whose health is gradually deteriorating? What are those details, and how does that feel? What is that sensation? And Roth goes on, he's very open about his experiences in this process as a child. He writes, being by myself also allowed me to be as emotional as I felt, without having to put up a manly or mature or philosophical front. Alone, when I felt like crying, I cried. And I never felt more like it than when I removed from the envelope the series of pictures of his brain. And not because I could readily identify the tumor invading the brain, but simply because it was his brain, my father's brain. What prompted him to think the blunt way he thought, speak the emphatic way he spoke, reason the emotional way he reasoned, decide the impulsive way he decided. This was the tissue that had manufactured his set of endless worries and sustained for more than 8 decades his stubborn self-discipline, the source of everything that had so frustrated me as his adolescent son, the thing that had ruled our fate back when he was all-powerful in determining our purpose. And now it was being compressed and displaced and destroyed because of, quotes, a large mass predominantly located within the region of the right cerebellopontine angles and prepontine cisterns. And the way that he is trying to grapple with this, the way that he is experiencing this is very honest. I was alone and without inhibition, and so while the pictures of his brain, photographed from every angle, lay spread across the hotel bed, I made no effort to fight back anything. Maybe the impact wasn't quite what it would have been had I been holding that brain in the palms of my hands, but it was along those lines. And there is something incredibly heartfelt about numerous memories that Roth experiences across this book in Patrimony. There is a brutal, raw honesty. Roth had demonstrated his willingness to go into all sorts of scatological detail and physical detail and personal detail in prior books. But here it is personal without being aggrandizing. It is personal without sensationalizing on any particular level. There are scenes that are incredibly honest. Well, my father never reached his 80s, and we did not have a long, slow process of caring for him. I've had grandfathers I had a grandfather who was in his 80s who, as I was reading passages here, there were specific instances where I was like, yes, that is a real experience. That is something that even being incredibly wealthy or incredibly successful, it is an experience that many of us will share as humans, as we see loved ones age and change. In another passage, he writes just an absolutely extraordinary description of what he experiences having found out about this. He's going and driving to visit his father, and he ends up at the cemetery where his mother was buried several years earlier when she passed away. And this section is really an excellent insight into Roth's sort of philosophies about the world, but also into a sensation and emotion I think many of us have sensed. And he gets there and he goes, "My mother and the other dead had been brought here by the impelling force of what was, after all, a more unlikely accident, having once lived. I find that while visiting a grave, one has thoughts that are more or less anybody's thoughts, and leaving aside the matter of eloquence, don't differ much from Hamlet's contemplating the skull of Yorick. There seems little to be thought or said that isn't a variant of, he hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. At a cemetery, you are generally reminded of just how narrow and banal your thinking is on this subject. Oh, you can try talking to the dead if you feel that'll help. You can begin as I did that morning by saying, 'Well, Ma,' but it's hard not to know, if you even get beyond a first sentence, that you might as well be conversing with the column of vertebrae hanging in the osteopath's office. You can make them promises, catch them up on the news, ask for their understanding, their forgiveness, for their love. Or you can take the other, the active approach. You can pull weeds, tidy the gravel, finger the letters carved in the tombstone. You can even get down and place your hands directly above their remains, touching the ground, their ground. You can shut your eyes and remember what they were like when they were still with you, but nothing is altered by these recollections, except that the dead seem even more distant and out of reach than they did when you were driving in the car 10 minutes earlier. If there's no one in the cemetery to observe you, you can do some pretty crazy things to make the dead seem something other than dead. But even if you succeed and get yourself worked up enough to feel their presence, you will still walk away without them. What cemeteries prove, at least to people like me, is not that the dead are present, but that they are gone. They are gone, and as yet we aren't. This is fundamental, and however unacceptable, grasped easily enough. And there's something heartbreaking there. There's something that I think many of us vacillate on a pendulum between believing in an afterlife and believing that we will be reunited with loved ones, and that we or that we perhaps retain a cosmic connection with our loved ones. And that's something that I think many of us think about and examine. And at times, even people who don't believe that want to believe it just for one last interaction, one last hug. And the way that Roth is able to describe this with his glib tone at times, but also this unflinching way he's willing to look and examine how he's feeling in this moment is very honest. It's very raw. It's very brutal. And there are others who, as Roth believes, that there is nothing after our life, and so that there is a finality to these goodbyes that is, I think, just as heartbreaking as the sense of emotion and pathos conjured by someone who believes they will be reunited with a loved one, but must be here on earth without that person. And so throughout the book, I don't want to go into all the details, but he goes through a combination of tracing through these final months of the tumor and its effect on his father's health, and the relationships that his father has with different people and how those are changing, not just Roth's own relationship with his father. But he also goes and brings on various memories, things he appreciated about his dad, or little conversations they had had. He discusses what it was like for his mom to pass away very suddenly, the opposite of what happened with his father, and how his father had dealt with that, and had his own breakdown in that moment. And then he has this description of how his father's dealing with sort of trying to think through what are the different surgical options, what would that mean? And this is Herman Roth speaking now. I'll never forget him coming down those stairs in the Beth Israel Hospital the night that you were born, 3 a.m, the main staircase of the hospital. Ira was in his white gown. I said to him, "What is it, Ira, Phyllis or Philip?" And he said, "It's Philip, Herman, another boy." I'll never forget that. And my brother Charlie dying in my arms. Such a handsome man, all that energy. 4 children, and he died in my arms. My older brother I worshipped. And my brother Milton. Remember Milton? No, I said, Milton died the year before I was born. That's how I got my middle name. Milton, he said, 19 years old, a brilliant student, the shining light of the family, his senior year at Newark College of Engineering. On and on, remembering the illnesses, the operations, the fevers, the transfusions, the recoveries, the comas, the vigils, the deaths, the burials, his mind in its habitual way, working to detach him from the agonizing isolation of a man at the edge of oblivion, and to connect his brain tumor to a larger history, to place his suffering in a context where he was no longer someone alone with an affliction peculiarly and horribly his own, but a member of a clan whose trials he knew and accepted and had no choice but to share. And I will leave interested readers to go through the final pages. I will say that the final 3 or 4 pages of this with Philip Roth, a man who at times could be incredibly arrogant, and who had found incredible success, here is willing to strip away much of any facade or artistic facade he could create, and willing to face sort of a dark night of the soul as he spends the final hours with his dad, and how he dealt with that, and perhaps to reflect on how each of us deal with that. So I really, really recommend this. Although, of course, depending on what your situation is like right now, what your situation with loved ones is like right now, maybe steer clear of it for right now. But if you are in the mood or have a mental desire, an emotional desire to build that type of connection with our own lives, with the great equalizer that is death, there are a few books that I think approach it as honestly and as emotionally as this one did. So I highly recommend this book. Now, if you are a fan of Roth, this next section is for you. If you're not, just jump ahead to the recommended if you like. Here are the different connections. For fans of Roth, this book is critical. I think this is probably, as I said, one of the probably 5 best books he wrote. It is in a lot of ways a book that reveals just where some of the blurs exist between fiction and nonfiction in the Zuckerman books, even in the Roth books, where he's projecting perhaps a truer version of his opinions than we got in the Zuckerman books. But it's crucial to those. It's also crucial to books like Our Gang. It's crucial to, I would say, some of the attitudes in Exit Ghost, the final Zuckerman novel. Is a book that almost acts as a preamble to what he does in the final sequence of very short books like Everyman and The Humbling, where he's facing death really in sort of different visages of death, and of what could be his own death soon. And so I think Patrimony really just ties together so many different aspects of Roth's writing. Rereading this made me want to go read 5 or 6 of his different books of his. because this really does bring together so many different pieces. It allows us to see that the spoilers, massive spoilers for Roth's books, it allows us to see the differences between his own father and Zuckerman's father, and how his own father reacted to Portnoy's complaint versus how the Zuckerman alter ego's father reacted to Konwicki, or how Herman Roth had reacted to the stories in Goodbye Columbus and the novella there versus how the Zuckerman character's family reacts to his early stories in The Ghostwriter. So it's crucial there, but it's also crucial in terms of seeing the Herman Roth's unabashed political leanings, and how those, I think, inform Philip Roth's writing of Our Gang, and the satire, but absolutely unflinching takedown of the hypocrisy of the Nixon administration, or the way that he approaches the political election of 2004, the U.S. presidential election, in Exit Ghost, the final Zuckerman novel. So it kind of brings in those. This is a book that I think, to a certain extent, this and Operation Shylock almost free him to be able to write Sabbath Theater and American Pastoral in succession, which are two of the books I would be willing to place above this in his oeuvre. So this is just, I think, an incredibly crucial book. Some of the memories in here pop up again as refracted memories in The Plot Against America, probably his last really great book. So this is one to spend some time with if you are a deep Roth reader. Don't shy away from his nonfiction. All right, now in terms of recommended if you like, certainly with Roth, there's all sorts of places to start. I think that almost needs to be a separate video. But there is an aside in here about Portnoy's complaint and his father's reaction to it. The Zuckerman novels, starting with The Ghostwriter. My Life as a Man isn't really a Zuckerman novel, but starting with The Ghostwriter and moving through the Zuckerman trilogy and then the Prague Orgy, those are excellent works. The book American Pastoral, written later in the 1990s, is probably his single best novel. He writes in this about sort of the way he taught different writers, whether it was Tadeusz Borowski, who wrote about the Holocaust, or Bruno Schulz, who had died during the Holocaust. He also writes about Tadeusz Konwicki, a Polish novelist. He had helped sort of edit and get these writers published some years earlier. He writes about his memories of Primo, Levi. Now, in terms of thinking about death and writers approaching death, specifically the death of a father or of someone of great importance to the writer, my understanding of My Struggle, Book 1 by Karl Ove Knausgaard is that this is about the death of his father, sort of as a looming theme, unifying theme across the book. I would say Wittgenstein's Nephew by Thomas Bernhard is another book that I think is probably a little closer to what Roth is doing in Patrimony. The incredible passage about the death of Monseigneur, Le Grand Dauphin, Louis, the son of Louis XIV in 1711. That's one of the just absolute monuments that make up the range of the memoirs of the Duc de Saint-Simon. Is well worth reading, whether you read it in the volume. It is in the second volume of the collected memoirs, 1710 to 1715. Well, this is the abridged edition from, but you can also find it in Randall Jarrell's Book of Stories. The death of the narrator's grandmother, Marcel's grandmother, in The Guermantes Way by Marcel Proust. And certainly the death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read this one from Roth. And as I said, there are times where it was I had to go back and reread and kind of clear my eyes and go back and reread because Roth really touches on some true human emotions here. There's no play acting. So I hope everyone's doing well. I hope this wasn't a downer. Certainly, thinking about my memories of my father, it felt a little closer this past week in reading this one. But I certainly appreciate those. So I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.